All right, friends, welcome to another edition of Justice Matters. Now, ordinarily, we call this Justice Matters one-on-one because I don't think I have done a group interview previously, but I am really thrilled to be able to do one today because joining us today are folks who, until very recently, were employees at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And I know that may not be as familiar as sort of other components of our government, but the service that they render, which I will characterize as soft power, and they can correct me or help me be a little bit more precise as we go through this conversation. But I'm not sure that people appreciate the value, the importance of soft power and America wielding soft power around the globe, really with the stated purpose of avoiding more serious conflicts, armed conflict. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mission of the U.S. Institute of Peace and exactly what soft power is. But let me start by introducing everybody who's joining us today. We have Matt Lolich, we have Sasha Pippinger, we have Nicoletta Barbera, and we have Tamina Salakuddin. They are all fairly long time employees of the Institute of Peace until recently, and we're going to dig into that in a minute. And what I would like to do is have one of you, I think Sasha was volunteered by her friends and former coworkers, to give us a little bit of a 30,000-foot overview of what the Institute of Peace is, sort of when it was established, how it is funded, and how it has this kind of unique position. It's not actually part of the federal government. It's an independent nonprofit with the mission, as we've already discussed it. It is funded by Congress, but it's a little bit of an outlier, I think, including for me. I was a 30-year Fed, and I was sort of interested, and I learned a lot about how the Institute came about, how it's funded, how it operates, and what it does. So with that, Sasha, if you can kind of share with us the 30,000-foot overview of the Institute, its mission, and how it fits in the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. So the United States Institute of Peace, or USIP as we call it, was founded 40 years ago by an act of Congress. And so our mandate was set out in a piece of legislation that is called the USIP Act. And it was put into place by Congress at a time in world history where there was an increasing recognition that uh, it was important not just to be able to engage and be responsive to wars, but that there was this dire need at a national level, but indeed worldwide, to have greater expertise around how to resolve wars and how to prevent them in the first place. And so it was in that spirit that Congress established the United States Institute of Peace. But critically, the recognition at that time was that we weren't to be a function of the United States government. We were actually meant to offer services and expertise that would complement the work, the important work that any federal government does around diplomacy and defense. And so our mandate fundamentally is to prevent and resolve conflicts worldwide. And the way USIP has fulfilled that mandate over the last 4 decades, as you mentioned, Glenn, we receive an annual appropriation from Congress. Though, as you know, Congress also gives federal appropriations to lots of organizations that are not inherently part of the United States government. It is just something that Congress, representing the people of the United States, is deemed a useful investment for federal dollars. And so together with that congressional appropriation, USIP works on all around the world. We have a deep roster of regional experts, including Tamana and Nicoletta, that are on with us today, that specialize in Africa and South Asia, respectively. We also have centers on Russia and Europe that were looking very closely at the Ukraine conflict before USIP was closed down, a Latin America program, a very large Asia program, and then also our Africa program and Middle East and North Africa program. We had a large building. Our headquarters building was here in Washington, D.C., built actually with private donations along with special appropriation. So it was actually a privately owned building that belonged to the United States Institute of Peace, which is a separate legal entity from the U.S. government. And we also had field offices in a dozen countries around the world with both American nationals and also foreign nationals working to advance peace. And then additionally, we also have, in addition to our regional experts, we have a lot of subject matter experts. So all these questions, we have experts in ceasefires, in mediation, in mass atrocities, in women, peace, and security. So in all these questions that come together around how do you best prevent conflict, manage conflict when it exists, help societies recover from conflict, resolve conflicts. That's really what the 300 some employees of United States Institute of Peace were doing for 40 years until the DOGE takeover a few months ago.
You mentioned that it was created by Congress about 40 years ago, and it was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan. Is that right?
That's correct.
I don't think it's a stretch to say that President Reagan is something of an icon in Republican circles and conservative circles. And I don't want to make this a pop quiz, but how would you sum up soft power in a couple of sentences?
Well, I think the way we think about it is that there's traditional power that is exerted by states and governments in the world, and then there's an entire ecosystem of often non-governmental um, entities that basically add to the cultural or national influence that a country might have in the world. And that can encompass everything from economics. So Walmart and Walt Disney are part of soft power of the United States. It can involve people that are amplifying work with civil society. It can include journalists. So it's sort of a large zeitgeist of things that can make up, that can reflect American values in the world, whether or not they are directly related to the United States government, and that help create credibility and leverage for the United States as an actor in the world.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it. Let me shift over to your former colleague, Matt Lolich. And full disclosure, Matt and I know one another because he is a videographer who comes to our Team Justice gatherings each year. They're held in August in Washington, D.C., and folks who are justice oriented, rule of law oriented, who think the Constitution is kind of a big deal and ought to be abided by, get together and we try to kind of celebrate the rule of law. Matt is our videographer and does a remarkable job each year, not only capturing what goes on at our annual Team Justice gatherings, but then producing lots of wonderful highlight reels. So full disclosure, I wanted everybody to know that. But Matt, can you tell us what you did at the Institute of Peace before you were terminated? We'll get to that in a minute, and how long you were there.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for having us on, Dennis Glenn. AV production manager was my role as my latest. Essentially, I've been working on production that went on in the building for almost 12 years, so June of 2013. And I was brought in to basically revamp and create a production space for us to do live events, to do live broadcasts, to be the best that we could in the business and in the city basically. And that was we had an auditorium and we had a space in our main campus. And then we upgraded to a space in our buildings that we got next door and new technology and brand new cameras. And we were just in the middle of doing a 4K and huge multi-million dollar renovation to our space at the time. So, and it was working with all these different programs. And like you mentioned, South Asia and Africa team and Latin America. And our job was to help tell their stories and make them look good. Pack that auditorium full of people, talk about the trip you made, talk about the work you did, talk about the report you launched. Put it out there, compelling to watch, great to look at. And my goal was to make those the best in the city. I know for Nicoletta, we've been working hand in hand for a decade on things that you mentioned, women, peace, and security, things like that. So many events we did. I can just think of a bunch that we did together that were super important and really great. And members of Congress were there. And there's just so many. We had the Dalai Lama for events, and we did a lot of great stuff. And I was very proud of the work we did. And I think it made us look really good. It really did.
Boy, the Dalai Lama, that's an event I would have loved to be able to
We
attend
did
or
that
to
at
view.
midnight on one night with our former CEO because he's over in India there, and it was pretty awesome. It was pretty fun. Yeah.
My late father used to quote the Dalai Lama all the time, so I have
Ah.
a real affection for that. Okay, so Nicoletta, let's shift over to you. What did you do and how long were you with the Institute of Peace?
Sure. Thanks so much. And nice to meet you, Glenn. And also, Matt, the Dalai Lama was in our building many years ago
This
under
is
former
true. This
President
is true. We
Nancy
did do an
Lindbergh.
event with him live. That is with him in his
Yeah.
space. You're right. You're
Yeah.
right.
That was really cool. Yeah, my name's Nicoletta. I worked at the U.S. Institute of Peace for over 13 years. I started in January of 2012, right out of graduate school. I remember the first day I walked into the building and just taken aback by the majesty that is the Institute's building, and then learning about the work that they did. It was always a goal of mine to work there all through grad school, and kind of came in on the ground floor and worked my way up. Before I was terminated, I was the acting director for our West Africa, Sahel, and Central Africa programs. So I worked in the Africa Center, leading country-based and regional programs in Africa, and more recently in West Africa. I managed programs, both some programs that were directly funded by Congress through our base appropriations, and also in partnership with the US government through things we call interagency agreements, working with the State Department. In my case in particular, we had some with USAID, some with with the State Department. But in my case, 2 programs on elevating women's roles to identify the signs of terrorism in their communities and giving them skill sets to work with their security forces, with their local government officials, to prevent the spread of violent extremism and prevent recruitment of young people into terrorist groups. And then I also managed or worked on a program in the region in West Africa to promote a return to civilian rule in countries that had just gone through a series of coups or were currently living under military dictatorships. And so I worked with citizens of those countries to provide them some skill sets and some dialogue skills, and some tools on how to collaborate with their civil society, civilian partners on advocating for a return to civilian rule.
And in case anybody was wondering about the importance of the work of the Institute of Peace, both in those countries that you referenced and, in trying to prevent things from perhaps devolving in those countries and drawing the US in any number of ways, I think Nicoletta just kind of highlighted the importance of the work. So, Tamina, did I blow it? Did I blow the name?
No, that's great. Thanks so much,
Tamina, okay.
Glenn.
Can you
Good
tell
to be
us
with
about,
you.
yeah, what you do or what you
Yeah,
did?
sure. My name is Tamana Salakudin, and I was with USIP for almost 7 years. And I actually came out of a career in government. So I had been at state, I had been at the White House, working on South Asia issues my entire career for over a decade. And then I came over to USIP to lead the South Asia program and really build out a team that covers all of South Asia, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, Nepal, Bhutan. And we were one of the few programs or institutes in Washington that really thought about this entire region and had expertise across the region. It's a region that sometimes we don't necessarily have boots on the ground. We don't have as many diplomatic presences in that, but it covers a quarter of the world's population. It has 2 nuclear armed states, as many people just saw in the recent India-Pakistan crises. And so we became a very important team in terms of, we sort of had 2 facets of our work. One was really our thought leadership, and that was publications. So great publications on our websites, quiet briefings and memos we did for the State Department, for the National Security Council. And given our proximity to government, but we were outside of government, it actually provided us both with access. So didn't matter who was in the president, it could be a Democrat or a Republican, everybody would come to us for the expertise, and we could quietly brief them and give them memos. And because we were outside of the executive branch, we also had the distance in which we could write objectively and think about things in a long term. So in terms of crises, often people don't think about preparing for a nuclear or conventional war crisis like between India, Pakistan, or India, China, until they're in the middle of the crises. A place like USIP actually affords you the space and time. And what we did was develop plans for de-escalation, bring policymakers and other stakeholders together to start thinking about how do you respond to a crisis before it happens. So that's a lot of the work we did. Coupled with that, we were one of the few American institutions that was on the ground in South Asia. We had an office in Pakistan, we had a presence in Sri Lanka. We were doing on the ground work to prevent conflict. So we were funded obviously by Congress, but also by USAID, by state, by DOD. The Pentagon funded us, as did Department of Energy, to think about and look at how do you prevent conflict in this region so that the United States isn't drawn into a destabilizing war.
Wow. And I'll want to ask you all in a few minutes what happened or what is happening to the folks who were posted overseas in other countries when these abrupt terminations came about, which we'll talk about in a minute. And Sasha, let me circle back to you. I'm not sure if I asked you, what was your role? What did you do specifically at the Institute?
Yeah, I was the director of the peace processes team at USIP. I was there for about 2 years. Before that, I had been with the United Nations for many years, working for the special envoy on the Syrian peace process. I was based in a UN peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic for many years. I worked in Yemen. I worked in Kenya. I worked in Pakistan. But when I came to USIP, our team covered essentially all the tools that go into support peace processes. So mediation, negotiation, ceasefires, dialogue, reconciliation. And so the sorts of work that myself and my team would do would include direct support to ongoing peace processes. So in Colombia, where USIP has a large field office, we would provide support to the post-conflict judicial systems that were being set up in the aftermath of their peace agreement. We would also do direct training for Colombian officers around implementation and design of ceasefire mechanisms for the agreements that they were reaching with guerrilla groups that hadn't entered this original peace pact. And this is the kind of work we do all over the world. So in the few months before DOGE took over USIP, I was in Vietnam doing a mediation training for diplomats and diplomats in training there. I was in Egypt supporting the Defense Department and CENTCOM with a multinational training exercise they were running for partners in the Middle East. I was in Florida working with colleagues at Southcom, U.S. Southern Command, to discuss analytical products of scenario planning in conflict states. And the week that DOGE took over our building, I was actually scheduled to fly to Bahrain to do a training for deployed Marines out there. So it was very much a global job, and we collaborated, as Tamana's team does, very, very closely with the United States government, but independently and at our own discretion of how well it fit into our mandate.
Okay, and now I'm going to shift gears, but first I want to say thank you all for the work you did on behalf of the American people. And frankly, I hope you get the opportunity to continue in some capacity. It's no secret that what happened to the Institute of Peace is subject of litigation right now. Judge Beryl Howell in the Federal District Court in Washington, D.C. is presiding over that litigation. There's a hearing coming up, and we expect a ruling from Judge Howell fairly soon. And, you know, we'll be holding our breath. And the one thing I can say is, given the judge, the jurist that Judge Beryl Howell is, I have confidence that she's going to get it right. She's going to make the right ruling. And I think that ruling hopefully will be good for the Institute of Peace. But with that being said, now I want to turn to what happened this past March. And the way I want to introduce this is I went to the friendsofusip.org website. I will put the link to that website in the description of this video, and I urge everybody to go look at it. It's fairly short, it is digestible, but it really does highlight exactly, and I quote, what happened to USIP. And that's the section from which I'm going to read just a couple of short paragraphs. But if this doesn't catch your attention and frankly make your blood boil, then I would be surprised. Here is how it reads. Over the last 2 weeks of March, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, illegally took over the U.S. Institute of Peace, USIP, and began brazenly dismantling the organization. Through a concerted campaign of coercion, deception, and force, DOGE first fired the Institute's board of directors and president and seized USIP's privately owned building. DOGE then took over the Institute's computer systems, preventing employees from accessing critical communications platforms, sensitive documents related to their work, and even their own employee records. Nate Kavanaugh, a 28-year-old DOGE employee with no foreign policy experience, who was appointed president of USIP by, it says Rump, I think that's a misspelling. I think it meant to say Trump. Maybe it wasn't a misspelling. Was appointed president of USIP by a Trump board of directors, then transferred ownership of USIP's $500 million privately owned building to the U.S. General Services Administration for free. Okay, all of this is very curious to this old career prosecutor. When you take $500 million buildings and transfer them without the consent of the owner to another entity. But I'm going to continue to read just one more paragraph. On Friday, March 28th, DOGE fired over 95% of the Institute's domestic employees via email in the dead of night. These employees were provided no severance pay and told that their health insurance would expire in one business day. DOGE's actions have left terminated USIP staff at risk of severe health consequences from an unreasonable and inhumane rescission of insurance. While the situation is dire for domestic employees, USIP's overseas staff are left with immense uncertainty, stranded in active conflict zones with no support staff in the U.S. to help navigate the complex and dangerous challenges they face. And that is just a little flavor of what you will see if you go to friendsofusip.org. So let me now go kind of in reverse order, and I'll start with Tamina. Can you tell us what happened just prior to your termination, and then how you were notified you were terminated, and what were the consequences for you?
Yeah, thanks so much for asking. We knew that there was an executive order that mentioned USIP, but it asked for, the president had asked for reduction to our statutory minimum work. And we and our lawyers and our leadership took that very seriously. It's not that we were trying to go against an executive order. And we looked very clearly at our statute. The USIP statute is quite broad. And so we were already facing budget cuts, and we were looking really hard at what should we be cutting. So it's not that we didn't support efficiency or looking for better ways, but think about how small USIP was. You know, we had a $55 million endowment. We're a speck, if that, on the federal budget. But so in the months, between the executive order and DOGE taking over our building, we were doing our work, which was, crazy. Literally, I and my team went to the White House and briefed the National Security Council on our issues of work. We were engaging with the State Department. During Prime Minister Modi's visit, the White House actually lauded the work we did on the US-India defense technology relationship. In fact, just 2 weeks before we were closed down, I was invited to testify by Republican and Democratic staff on the Hill, the House Foreign Affairs Committee, talking about the importance of soft power in South Asia. Given how big an area it is and what's the most efficient use of US power, and soft power makes sense. You're not gonna go address 1 billion people, without soft power. And so we felt that we were in good faith working through all of this. It happened very suddenly. I was luckily not in the building when they took it over, but we were all working, we were sent to work from home. We no longer had access to any of our files, which is problematic. This is, a decade's worth of at least my work, my research, writing, and that of my colleagues. So it's not just immediate personnel records, but many of us are very committed to the intellectual work we are doing. Not only that, they took it off of our website. So taxpayer funded research. USIP published one of the few leading papers, for example, on Chinese military equipment to the Pakistani military, right? That would have been useful in the recent crises, where we see the use of Chinese equipment, to fight the Indians. They've, all of our published work basically disappeared. You can't access it if you go to the website now. The day, so for 2 weeks, we couldn't access anything. We were stuck at home. We were getting mixed messages about what it was going to happen. For me personally, it was very hard. I got an email in the middle of, I think, 10:30 at night, and it was the day before Eid. So it was after Ramadan. I was about to imagine getting fired on Christmas Eve. That's exactly how it felt. My 2 little kids, I kept it from them so that they could enjoy their holiday. But I'm still committed to my work, and I continue to, even though I'm no longer employed by USIP, I continue to work in the service of peace, and I care deeply about the region and US policy in the region.
And did you experience your health insurance?
Yeah, our health benefits
canceled?
stopped right away. I canceled, all my children's doctor's appointments, dentist appointments. I'm lucky and blessed that my husband, we switched over, but it took a month. People don't turn on and turn off insurance like that. More importantly, I oversaw an office in the field, and broadly in Asia, we had other staff in the field. Even after we were fired, we were working really hard to keep those people safe, because they had gone out on a limb, and working for a US institute, a named US institute, puts many of these people at risk. There are places with active wars. And so every day I was talking to my colleagues in the field and trying to find, the next steps to respectfully and responsibly close down our offices overseas. You can't close an international office overnight. Not only that, we were funding and helping, what is soft power? We were helping voices in these countries against conflict in US interests. So all of those people, the carry-on effect is all of those people lost their funding, lost their jobs. So it is not just in the United States. It's a ripple effect all over the world.
Thank you for sharing that. Nicoletta, what was your experience like? I assume you got a similar email, and was there any explanation about the termination that came in these emails?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. No, it just said at the discretion of the president of the institute. We were terminated effective immediately. Like I said, I'd been there 13 and a half years. There was nothing in it that said it was due to cause. There's no information as to what happened, and it just happened again in the dead of night. We understood in kind of an alphabetical order. I was one of the first with the last name Barbera. My husband also worked at the institute. He had been there for 15 years. He was one of the last. For a bit, we thought maybe the bottom of the alphabet was spared, but alas, that was not the case. So our family of 4, I have 2 small children. We had 1 day with no health insurance. We're now on receiving state assistance, which took a long time to work to get. Unlike someone, I frantically tried to schedule appointments on the 31st so my children could have access to healthcare for 1 more day to prevent any horrible things from happening. I just wanted to make sure they were okay. So it's been very tough. We've been navigating unemployment, which is not something I anticipated having to do for the entire household. It's been tricky because of so many people terminated. There's no one to even there's not many people answering the phones at the Institute to verify that we were employees of the Institute or what our wages were. So I have many friends and colleagues who still haven't received their unemployment compensation because no one's answering the phone, which is just, I think, inhumane. There's no reason to do something like this, aside from spite or something else that's making this happen. So it was, it's been a tough month and a half. And like my colleagues are all doing, I'm still so connected to the colleagues I worked with in Africa. I oversaw the Nigeria office. It was a small but mighty team, as well as individual colleagues in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Niger, some of whom are single parents. Their work with USIP was their livelihood as well. They still haven't been paid for the month of March, for April. So they're asking me, do I have any information? I haven't been able to access anything and was terminated since March 17th, no access to anything. but I'm trying my best to support them because, like Tamana said, they gave their lives, often putting themselves in grave danger to support the mission of the U.S. Institute of Peace, and we dedicated our lives to supporting them and peace and security.
Perhaps a silly question, but can you even access the kind of materials that you would need to go about putting together a resume and applying for other jobs, or you've been completely locked out of your own files, your own work product that would be helpful as you go about presumably looking for new employment?
I had to take, I mean, I list my publications on my resume, but I can't link to them. I have a printout of it somewhere that I got when I went back into my office for the 15-minute time slot. I had to pack up my things and then exit via the loading dock where the trash cans are in the back of the building under DOGE leadership. So no, I don't have anything needed to make myself a viable candidate for pursuing other ventures in the space, but we're all doing the best we can.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that. Matt, what was your experience when you got that presumably late night, termination email?
Yeah, it was the world of, it's like you were sitting in an airport or something and your flight got delayed or something. And we're just kind of like hanging out, right? And waiting to see what happens over those 2 weeks. Because that was Friday the 14th that everything kind of started when they came to the building and everything escalated from there. So yeah, March 28th, end of a pay period, I think it was. It was either end of a pay period or was a payday, I don't remember. That's, if you're thinking in terms of, the employer, that's kind of when those things happen. So, I think we knew that was going to come at some point. But I got info from a colleague at about 8:30 that evening that notices were coming out, and I said, you know what? If they're coming, they're going to come. I'm turning off my phone, turning off my devices, and I'm going to enjoy my rest of my evening. I'll handle this in the morning. And the email was waiting for me in the morning. Yeah, just saying your time here is over, or you're not needed anymore. Essentially, that was the 28th. Your insurance is good till the 31st, which again, that isn't really going to do a whole lot of good there. Pretty quick, pretty swift, and yeah, not a lot of information on what happens next. Really, just that was kind of it. It was interesting. It was very chaotic, and especially everything that happened afterwards. You're just it kind of like it's like when a hurricane blows through. The damage gets done and instantly, and then there's all this cleanup to do, and we have to do all this cleanup and figure out what to do next. And the thing that I love is everyone was supportive. I mean, everyone is in conversation and on messages and trying to help each other and trying to talk to each other. And none of us are alone here. Like, this is all like an effort to try to do the best we can and to help each other and figure these things out. And if one person navigates or finds they're going to pass it on. Hey, I figured this out. Talk to so and so. We'll figure all this stuff out. We had some help from people. Yeah, but like Nicoletta was talking about, one thing I think about, I don't have any publications or anything, but I'm sorry that all happened because, yeah, the stuff you wrote, I mean, yeah, usip.org is go to the website. There's nothing there. You can't access it. So your work, the stuff you did is not there. I mean, the broadcast I did may live online somewhere, for some people to see still, obviously, but that doesn't help anybody else out really. Their stuff is gone. So it just happened so quickly and so fast, and it was just very confusing. And you're telling people about it a lot, and they kind of are like, "No, what really happened?" And it's no, that is really what happened. So I tell people I could live to be 106 years old, and I'm not sure I'd ever have a story more odd and interesting than that. I don't know.
Or cruel and inhumane. I mean, when I retired from the Department of Justice after more than 30 years as a Fed, I went through endless lectures and seminars and informational presentations about what it all meant for my benefits, my health benefits, my annuity. It seemed to be this endless run up of information that, I was thankful was
Yeah.
being provided to me.
Right.
And to hear that people are getting emails saying you're out for no good reason. And by the way, tomorrow you lose your health insurance and your family potentially loses their health insurance unless they are otherwise covered. That is beyond cruel, right? It's inhumane. No employer should treat people that way. I know I'm stating the obvious, but it really is. It makes your blood boil that the people, and listen, for anybody who has ever been either a federal government employee or affiliated in some way, like the Institute of Peace is, with public service, we don't do it to get rich. You know, we do it for the mission. And I can probably speak for all of you, even though I don't know you well. We do it for the mission. We do it because there's something in us that wants to serve others, wants to serve the American people to the best of our ability. And, you know, I was a lawyer my whole career, and goodness knows my friends who were out there in the private sector earning the big bucks, you know, sometimes I envied them, but not often, because I loved what I did for the American people. It was an honor and a privilege, and it fulfilled me. And I'll bet the same goes to all for all of you. But now, Sasha, let me circle back to you. What was that day like for you when you got that email?
Yeah, I was fired on that same night, the evening of March 28th, along with Nicoletta and Tamana and Matt. And as the others were alluding to, the firing started around 9 p.m. And they unfolded in alphabetical order, though it took us a little while to understand that was happening. So in those first few moments, because we'd been taken off all of our work systems, we'd had to sort of rebuild a communication structure among ourselves, relying heavily on the app Signal. And so we had all sorts of chats for sharing information and trying to navigate this period when we were kicked off our USIP systems. So when these termination letters started rolling into people's personal emails, in some cases, people received their termination letter via WhatsApp because they didn't have a email on file. They began rolling in, and we had not been told that these terminations were coming. So we were trying to figure out what method there was to the madness. And we had maybe 4 or 5 people, including Nicoletta, who's early in the alphabet, reporting, I just got a letter. And here we are trying to say, what does a mass atrocities expert over here and a North Korea expert over here and a Western Africa Sahel acting director have in common? How could they be making these choices? And then we realized that it was all people whose last name started with the letter A and B. And that's how we understood in that first hour what was happening. And then so that started around 9 p.m. Mine came around 11:40. So I had 2.5 hours of watching every member of my team be fired and let me know and waiting for my own termination to come. And I will tell you something, which is we knew even before this happened to USIP that this is a hallmark of DOGE firings, as they like to do it on Friday evenings after business hours. And it's not for nothing. They have a rationale to that. And the reason they do it, we're pretty sure, is because we can't access the courts over the weekends. We can't get a hold of lawyers over the weekends. We can't get in touch with our health insurance providers over the weekends. They are intentionally making it as difficult as possible for us to cope with that situation. And I can tell you how that practice directly impacted me because, as others have mentioned, I was fired a bit before midnight on Friday night, and my health insurance ended on Monday at the close of business. The reality for me is I have a incurable autoimmune disease. And so I am on a treatment that's a drug infusion chemotherapy treatment that I receive every 6 weeks. I just started that treatment this past year. It's been going well. The problem with this treatment is because it's a very expensive medication, the pre-approval process with a health insurance company takes 4 to 6 weeks. So from the moment I get a new health insurance company, if I'd gone to the marketplace on 31 March, found a new health insurance company, I could not have gotten the pre-approval for that drug quickly enough to get my next infusion. It just wouldn't be possible. So what I needed to do was take the COBRA option that's available when you lose your job. So my plan was to use the COBRA extension and to pay out of pocket. It's set to be around $700 or $800 a month for me to pay for this very expensive COBRA option so that I could continue my treatment. Because the reality is, if I miss a infusion treatment of this medication, if there's a lapse in treatment, my body can develop antibodies. And once that happens, I can never use that treatment again for the rest of my life. It's closed off to me. So it's a permanent harm that I can't get back. So my only choice was to pay for this COBRA. The problem is, as Nicoletta also mentioned, they fired all but 2 members of our human resources team, which meant that for these nearly 300 staff that were fired that night, we were all relying on 2 humans who were under inordinate pressure and were busy doing the termination paperwork for 300 people to help us resolve these problems. And because they had structured it this way, it meant that the task, in order to get covered by COBRA coverage, your former employer, as Nicoletta was mentioning, they have to send information to the unemployment office for you to be eligible for unemployment. They also have to send information and say, we've terminated these people to your COBRA provider. Until they do that, your coverage can't activate. So I have had, in between my autoimmune disease and an injury I had to my brachial plexus nerve, I have probably about 3 medical appointments a week for the last 2 months, and I am paying for those out of pocket now, because my COBRA has not been activated yet. Eventually, we hope it will be, because that process will happen, but it's just another example of how inhumane the way they've gone about this is, because the reality is you can terminate employees in the way the American workforce is structured. That's an okay decision to be made when it's being made by the people that hold that power, but it is not okay to do it the way that they did it to us. And what a lot of people don't understand about our situation is that all of the actions that DOGE took are premised on the idea that USIP is part of the federal government. That is the authority they claim in taking over our building and firing us. However, in the USIP Act that created USIP, it says explicitly that none of us as employees of USIP are federal workers. So we are somehow subject to at will, without notice termination by the federal government, but we are not ourselves our federal workers, which means we have none of the protections that other federal workers similarly situated at USAID and in other places that are undergoing actual legal rifts. We don't get any of those protections. So none of us got put on admin leave. None of us had severance that was paid out with a policy that had pre-existed. None of us got continuation of our healthcare benefits. Those are basic things that the federal government affords its own employees to avoid situations like this. But DOGE wanted the best of both worlds, where they can fire us because we are allegedly part of the federal government, while giving us none of the protections that would help federal workers in this exact circumstance.
Talk about the real, direct, and even medical harm that they are doing for no good reason other than to inflict pain on people. I mean, it's really, there's no efficiency anywhere near any of this. There's no, attacking fraud, waste, and abuse. Of course, if that was the goal, they probably would not have gotten rid of lots of inspectors general. So all of this seems pretty transparently calculated to do the kind of harm that you are all describing you have suffered and continue to suffer. Let me ask a few questions, and you may not know the answers because you're no longer, with the Institute, but what happened to the people who are posted overseas?
I know they were given, I believe, a different timeline of, I think, what to do and how that was going to be handled. There was one employee that I know that Nicolette and I used to work with as well, living in Tunis, I believe it was, and I unfortunately don't have information on what happened as
I'm
far as
happy to talk about it because I managed several overseas employees. So I had a team of 10 people overseas. And as part of the Asia Center, we had several offices. And even after we were fired, we were asked to help them because I guess one lesson that they learned through their legal case, DOGE learned through USAID, was when you fire a bunch of overseas employees, you actually put them in harm's way, which is the reason that they didn't fire all of the overseas employees right away, the way they did the DC-based staff. So they learned that lesson by the court cases that they lost. So what they did was they asked us in a very innocuous way, we want to ensure the safety of overseas employees. So we need to know all of their names and where they are and what might happen to them if they lost their jobs. And so once they compiled all of that data, then they went through and gave, then they came up with their own plans of how to fire them. And many of us who had been fired continued to work on this to ensure that our colleagues would be safe overseas. And so by the end of this month, all overseas staff, it depends on where they were, but they received termination notices based on the legal contracts. We tried our hardest to protect whatever legal rights they had, depending on their countries. So in certain countries, there are legal rights that they have that are above and beyond whatever we got here as in the US. Also, we had lease contracts. For example, our office is overseas. We had lease agreements. So we worked with them. To my understanding, the last overseas employees will be terminated by the end of this month, by May 31st.
Well,
And can I just add to one quick
yes,
addition
please.
that we, because we're an independent, organization. We don't fall under chief of mission authority, so we have no protections and no assistance from the government in relocating staff if need be, in ensuring safety and security of our staff, in shutting down a lease. None of that. We do that independently. So in terminating everyone in HQ, nothing could be done to protect or assist our colleagues overseas. So just wanted to clarify that we operate completely independently.
So that, if I might add to that, what
Please.
Nicoletta's saying, that means our staff are also in more dangerous places, right? They're not in the green zone. They're not only on the embassy compound or something like that. They work where the conflict is. And more often than not, they are host country nationals, because we are trying to solve conflicts overseas before they become US problems, right? So those people basically were left without any backstopping here in Washington.
And just to be clear, DOGE tells you all you're fired. Oh, and now, by the way, we'd like you to help us. And listen, I supervised folks at the Department of Justice. There's nothing I wouldn't do, even after being fired, to help my colleagues and certainly my supervisees remain safe. And I have a feeling DOGE wanted your assistance in that regard so that DOGE wouldn't get in trouble, not to protect the people that they were trying to wrongfully terminate both here and abroad. But maybe that's too cynical, but I don't think so. Okay, another question you may or may not be able to answer. Who's doing the work of the Institute of Peace presently?
That's a great question, Glenn, and it's the one that we've been asking Judge Howell to look into, because the reality is, as Tamana said, our statute that was created by Congress legally requires us by law to do a set of activities. In fact, there's multiple statutes where we've been tasked by Congress to deliver specific things related to peace building. At the current moment, as far as we know, there are two staff members that were assigned by DOGE to USIP, including Nate Kavanaugh, the acting president, who's 28 years old, and another gentleman named Justin Fox. Now, one thing we know about these two DOGE staff that have been in charge of USIP since late March is that it is not their full-time job. And we know this because there are news articles coming out every single day where they are going to private NGOs like the Vera Institute of Justice. They are going to the Smithsonian. They are going to the Millennium Challenge Corporation. They seem to have the portfolio of every single organization, federal or not, in the international assistance ecosystem. And they are in charge of going there, basically firing all the staff and reducing those organizations to a person or two. So right now, the status of USIP is we have those two people who haven't been in the building, to our understanding, in weeks, if not months, because it is not their full-time job. Then they have three staffers that they kept on, one that is doing finances, closing out contracts, one that is doing the human resources closeout, and one that is doing IT systems. Then in addition to that, you have all these field staff that are being rounded down, but already have their termination notices. So as far as we understand, within a few weeks, there will be nobody but those DOGE staffers working at USIP. And there is no universe where they can claim that they have the peace building expertise necessary to run any of the statutorily required functions that USIP has to do. And this has been raised before Judge Howell in both the lawsuits that USIP has brought that are both underneath her. And she herself has said that she is very curious to hear how, one, DOGE defines the statutory minimum of USIP, and two, how they have been going about doing it, because there is no system there. As has been mentioned before, there is no human resources system that could plausibly, there's no human resources system that could plausibly hire new people to do these functions. There's no international security staff to support people that might work overseas. There is no IT systems for people to have an email account. All the trainings, the online trainings that we did on a range of peace building affairs were taken offline. All of the work product we've ever done that were required by law to be a clearinghouse for and to share with parties around the world was on our website that they took offline the day they came into our building. So there's no universe that we can conceive of where we are possibly delivering on our statutory mandate. And that is indeed one of the legal claims that we've put to the court, is that this is a violation of Congress's statute.
Yeah,
and if I might add,
please.
Obviously we're not doing our statutory minimum, nor are we doing any of the work that actually helps support the US government. So I think if you were paying attention, just last week, there was a huge crisis between India and Pakistan. there is nobody at USIP. There's nobody you can email. There's nobody you can ask. And so we had folks from the US government, from Congress, tracking my team down via, phone numbers and personal email addresses, and asking us for our advice and our old research, because it has disappeared into thin air. And so the fact that they are still coming to us means that the administration, that they recognize that there was something of value at USIP, but it doesn't exist anymore.
And may I add one?
Yeah,
Sorry,
please,
go on,
no,
Glenn,
please, Nicoletta, please.
I just now we're getting riled up and heated, but no, I just wanted
Me too, but go ahead. Yeah.
to add to the points that Sasha and Tamana made in terms of the value that it was clear we were providing in collaboration with our U.S. government colleagues. The day before I was terminated, U.S. government colleagues were reaching out to me asking, is there any way that we can extend the interagency agreement we have with you to fulfill the contractual requirements that USIP had with the State Department on this agreement to continue to do the work? And I said, I please try, but there's nothing I can do because I'm locked out of every system and I have no contact with our current acting president and board chairman, Mr. Kavanaugh. But I urged her to try this. It's the last thing I'll say in terms of the value. Just like my colleagues, the reason that I was so caught off guard when we were shut out of everything on March 17th, we were in the Africa Center just finishing up a series. It was called an ambassadorial series, where we were connecting all the new members of the new Trump administration of the US government with African ambassadors of the diplomatic corps to ensure better cooperation and collaboration around the safer, stronger, more prosperous priorities of the government. So we were working hand in hand to make these connections to ensure better cooperation and a fruitful relationship moving forward. They were very well attended programs up until the day before DOGE entered our building.
So yeah, why should we focus on soft power when we could just stampede to armed conflict, right? I mean, all right, so I have one last question, and then I want to just ask you all if there's anything you want to add in closing. But this is a real curiosity to me. How is it that a building worth $500 million, privately owned, can just be transferred to the General Services Administration of the federal government? If anybody has lawfully, does anybody have any insight or thoughts about that?
We know the facts of how it happened. And the facts of how it happened were that even after the executive order targeting USIP was released, and even after we tried to communicate with the federal government that we are not in fact part of the executive branch, they were not interested in that account. They had already made a determination, or perhaps they hadn't made a determination and they just didn't care. But DOGE decided to come and take our building by force. They didn't ask questions about what we did. They didn't ask questions about who we were. And they clearly, patently did not read our formative statute before taking over, because they violated all sorts of parts of our statute in doing what they did. Then, unfortunately, as you'll be familiar with as a lawyer, we filed for a temporary restraining order. But of course, the threshold for achieving a temporary restraining order is extraordinarily high. And because we were essentially bringing really complicated constitutional questions that concern Article 2 removal powers of the president, there was no way that the judge was comfortable making a decision on how likely we were to succeed in the merits at that stage. So we were denied the temporary restraining order. Now, I have to say that I have to imagine when the judge made that decision, in an ordinary universe, that would be a reasonable decision for a judge to make, because they would give the benefit of the doubt to the government that the government was not going to abuse that time during litigation to do damage that couldn't be reversed. That is the basic understanding of what is meant to happen during litigation, is you are not meant to do things that are being contested in the litigation that you can't reverse. But that is not the universe DOGE operates in. So they immediately moved to put themselves on our bank accounts, on our USIP private non-federal government bank accounts, so that they could then proceed to transfer the building. And so Nate Kavanaugh, the 28-year-old working for DOGE, wrote a letter to the GSA Services Administration, and he himself said, I am the acting president of USIP, and I hereby give you for nothing, for no consideration, this $550 million building, because I don't think USIP needs it anymore. Unfortunately, that wasn't public. And so by the time we got wind that that letter had gone to GSA and we managed to get back in front of Judge Howell for a second TRO hearing to say, you can't let this transfer go through. This is the definition of irreparable harm. It was too late. DOJ came into court that day and they said, the transfer's already happened. There is nothing to restrain here with your temporary restraining order. And so that also gave Judge Howell no choice to be able to reverse something that had already happened. So we are awaiting summary judgment in this case that will hopefully come this week. And we really hope that this is one of the huge legal wrongs that will be righted by the court.
Staggering. It's staggering. All right, so let me just kind of go around the horn here and ask you all if there's anything you want to include that I missed, or any sort of message that you want to impart to the folks who are watching this this video. Matt?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. And I think the answer, I know this was your question to me originally, was what do you guys do? And I think that's the question that Judge Howell had. That's what I've heard for you guys probably too, as long as I've been there. It's been, oh, you work in that big building with all the windows, or "Well, what do you guys do?" Right? Well, that's what we're trying to explain now. And I hope everybody gets that, whether or not whatever happens in this court happens. Figure out, I want people to know what we did, right? That's something that I think needs to be remembered, and it's important that we did a lot of great things. I've sat in on so many events over the years that can't even count anymore, but I've learned something from all of them. And I've learned about, things that happen in South Asia and things that happen in Latin America and women, peace and security. I think, Nicoletta, you and I have done so many events, I could probably recite them at this point. Like, we've done so much of this stuff, and I think it's all important, and I think it's really good stuff, and I think it's stuff that I'll carry with me forever, and the knowledge I've gained from it. Because I'm not on a program staff. I have kind of a different view of everything that happened here. So for me, this was free, great education. I learned I've met so many great people, and I'm just really upset about the way this ended this way. And I hope that things are turned around. And to use your line, Glenn, justice matters, right? And it does, and it's important. And hopefully, we get things to go. And maybe it's put together years from now. Maybe it's put back together 10 years from now. I don't know. My hope is that whether we're around there or not, that this place gets put back, because I think that it does matter. I think it is important for everybody.
Thanks, Matt. Nicoletta?
Thanks for this question. My brain's going in like 50 different directions with things that I'd want to say. I guess the two messages that I'd like to share. One is I want people to understand the harmful effects of these actions towards what is being deemed the federal bureaucracy. In our case, not part of the federal bureaucracy, but lumped into it. The harmful effects that these actions are having on individual American citizens, who are, like you said, Glenn, just working to pursue American values and the mission of the United States abroad. But we are American citizens, and we're being treated terribly like we've described. And I don't want to get back into it, but really inhumanely, I think we've all said. The second is just for me, as someone who had been at the Institute for over 13 years, like I said, I dedicated my life to it. It came out of school. Working for USIP, it's devastating if USIP is lost. I briefed so many student groups that would come in through our public education program, peace education programs, to inspire the next generation of people into what is even peace building. What does it mean to protect the United States abroad and contribute to a mission that's bigger than you? And truly, I felt like it made a difference. And to know that that's lost, and kids, high school age kids, college age students pursuing their careers can't come through USIP anymore and learn about that is devastating. So maybe that's the mom in me coming out, but those are the two messages that I'd like for people to know.
Thank you. Tamana?
Thanks so much for having us today. I want to talk about two things as well. First, I want to talk about, why do we even need a U.S. Institute of Peace? Why do we need an institute that does thought leadership or convening or writes on this? Couldn't private institutions do this? Couldn't the State Department do this? Couldn't the Pentagon do this? I think the founders, bipartisan, Republicans and Democrats, came together in a post-war era to really think about, we spend so much money on war. Are we spending money on preventing conflict, on thinking about ways to get to peace? And that's the genius of USIP. And I think why is it that we were quasi-federal? Why is it that we took US taxpayer money but sat outside of the executive branch? I think that is part of the genius. We didn't have to take money from foreign governments. We didn't take money from foundations. So we could be unbiased. We could work for the American people. We could be bipartisan. So when I wrote something, when my colleagues wrote a piece of analysis, we weren't beholden to our donors, right? Because it was the American taxpayer that was our funder. I think that's really important. Second, it was far more efficient and far more cost savings to do this work to prevent conflict. We were a tiny speck on the federal appropriation. It is much better that the face of the United States be peace, be conflict management rather than boots on the ground. Not only are boots on the ground not welcome, that's not how you make friends in other countries, but more importantly, it's way, way more expensive for US taxpayers. So, I mean, I think the genius behind why we have an institute that sits right outside of the executive, that we're not part of the federal bureaucracy, but we work closely with them, is very smart. Second, I'd like to just leave you with a personal story. Look, I'm the child of immigrants. My father came to this country in the early 70s, bright student to do his PhD in aerospace engineering. He worked for NASA. He raised kids in this country. And I, out of law school, joined the federal government. I worked for the federal government for over a decade, and then I worked for the US Institute of Peace. My career has been one of service. I could go make more money outside of government. I could go make more money somewhere else. But I actually believe in the mission. I believe in service. And I think that's what you have to realize about the people that DOGE is firing. These, whether it's a park ranger or it's a USIP person or it's someone at EPA, these are people who have given their lives to service. And I just want to remind people of that. These are your neighbors. We're not bureaucrats from another planet. So thank you.
We literally had an employee who literally gave her life and sadly passed away years ago from the work she did, literally. And it was, I mean, that's how much this stuff means to people.
And when you talk about boots on the ground being kind of an undesirable last ditch effort, I was active duty Army for 6.5 years before I joined the Department of Justice. The last thing I ever wanted to do was deploy anywhere because peace is a beautiful thing. And if we can, avoid, armed conflict and endangering US service members, my goodness. I mean, is there anything kind of more valuable to the American people in the world? I don't know. Sasha?
Yeah, I associate myself with what all of my colleagues said. And I think, my final message would be it's really easy for this story to get lost in this broader story of what's happening in Washington right now with the reduction of the federal government. And frankly, in my view, the disrespect of federal workers. The courts are cluttered with these cases, and we are just one of those cases there. And I think all of us can agree that there are valid conversations to be had between policymakers and elected officials in the executive and legislative branches about how to structure a federal government and whom to fund and how. And nobody disputes that. But this is not that. We are not part of the federal government. And if we accept the premise that any organization that receives a taxpayer dollar in federal funding is subject to the entire discretion of the President of the United States, then we will have no civil society left in this organization. Being a federal worker, working on behalf of the United States government is a mighty and huge responsibility, and it's one that many people at USIP have done in different moments of their career, including Tamana. But again, this is not that. And there's no universe where you can say that the 300 people that worked at USIP were somehow inadvertently working for the federal government when our statute says we weren't, and when the job offer that we accepted is not with the federal government. So for anyone to try and claim in a court of law that we are federal workers subject to federal decision-making around these questions is just blatantly dishonest, and it's a threat to every independent organization that we have in our country.
Hear, hear. And I thank the four of you not only for sharing these stories, but for the work that you've done on behalf of the American people. And I have a feeling one way or another, the work you will continue to do on behalf of the American people in the quest for peace. So thank you all. I'm wishing you the best. Yes, we will be watching closely to see what Judge Beryl Howell does. But as I've said before, I have complete trust and confidence in her abilities as a judge. She's fair, impartial, independent. She's no nonsense, and she tends to get things right. in my experience. So we will be hoping for the best from that ruling. Thank you again for joining us, and I wish you all the best in the future.